Just going to put those 4 screws in. That actually holds in the motherboard too from that side, so that's why it's important to get that in after we get the motherboard back in. All the holes are lined up, everything's looking good. You want to make sure by my thumb there is the wireless, my left thumb, there's the wireless switch. You want to make sure that that switch is seated back in properly when you put the motherboard in. Otherwise, when you try to flip the wireless switch on while the computer's put back together, it might not be grabbing the switch. So that's something you want to make sure of. You don't want to have to take the computer all apart because of that reason. Now we're going to start putting the screws in the motherboard. Looking for any other screws with a white arrow next to it. Those are usually the ones that you have to put back in. Now there's a lot of open screw holes, as you can see on the motherboard. I didn't put screws back in. That's because they are fastened in through the case. So anything that doesn't have a white arrow, usually on the motherboard, leave that screw hole open because that's going to get screwed in later in the process of putting everything back together. Make sure that the top case fits back on properly. And I had to take that one screw out because that screw actually screws through the top of the case into the motherboard. So just want to check. That's why I'm looking over everything, making sure all the holes are lining up. Then just push around the edges of the case, make sure everything snaps in. And then start putting screws back. And now these screws are actually going through those open holes in the motherboard like I was talking about before. I'm going to start putting screws in the bottom. Starting with these 2. They're actually hex nuts which provide the screw holes for the wireless card. They're like standoffs. That's what they look like, little standoffs. Just wanted to get that started. Sometimes I do that with a Phillips head screwdriver. And then I use the hex nut to put it back in. Now it's time to just put all the screws back in. Now I'm going to speed this up just to save you from some boredom. We're going to put that rear plate back on, which there's only one screw holding that rear plate on, that little strip, right there on the right hand side. So it's going to find the right size screw. Get the screen on. Attach the screen with the 4 screws. And then I use a bigger screwdriver to tighten it up and get some torque. You don't want those screws that hold the screen on to get loose. Then the screen flops around. Now the trick is to feed the wireless antennas back at the same path that was originally there. And these DV6000s have little metal tabs you bend up, and then you bend them back down once you get the wire in place. It makes everything flush. Otherwise the keyboard's going to be popping back out a little bit. It's kind of a pain to follow the path, but it does make it through. So, and then you feed it right back through the hole in the bottom. And the power board here has these 2 ribbon cables you got to be very careful with. And that little speaker cable right at the beginning there. We're going to feed these ribbon cables back into the connectors. Be very careful on the DV6000 when you reattach these ribbon cables. You don't want to bend them. They will break very easily. So just be very careful. Kind of inch them in if you have to. Use whatever means you have to. Just be very gentle. It doesn't look like I'm being gentle as this is going fast, but trust me, I'm taking my time with it. And then again, these have metal tabs. You pull them up, and the ribbon cables sit under the metal tabs. And then make sure you put the metal tabs back down. Otherwise, again, the keyboard will not be flush when you put the keyboard back on. Keyboard snaps in. Now, there's no screws holding the keyboard in from the top. They're all coming through the bottom. So once you get the ribbon cable for the keyboard in, it's going to slide right in and sit flush. Right under that hinge cover plate. Flip it around. Screw in the keyboard in now. And screw in the plate in now. Putting all the remaining screws in the bottom. We're attaching the wireless antenna. Putting in the hard drive. Putting in the CD drive, usually held in by 1 screw. Putting the RAM back in.